So as everybody knows, there have been exactly 45 presidents of the United States, from George Washington to Donald Trump. But did you know that there have been other presidents of the United States too? The key word being states. For you see, at various times in American history, the individual states have had their own presidents too. Let me give you some examples. When the original 13 British colonies separated from Great Britain in 1776, they initially set up all sorts of different crazy revolutionary systems of government that didn't last long, and usually these new independent state governments were headed by a president. My personal favorite was the government of Massachusetts, which was headed by a president who changed every couple of months. Though in practice, the presidency just kept bouncing back and forth between the same two guys, who were president over 20 times in just 5 years. It was only after the present Constitution of the United States was adopted in 1789 that the state governments became like they are today, where the head guy is called the governor, and it is pretty much the same job in every state. Two states kept their weird governments until 1793, however, which was well into the George Washington administration. They were Delaware and New Hampshire. The last president of Delaware was a guy named Joshua Clayton. When the presidency of Delaware was abolished, he became the first governor of the state, and his relatives would proceed to fill all sorts of other important government jobs as well, including senator and secretary of state. The Claytons were true Delaware royalty. The last president and first governor of New Hampshire was a guy named Josiah Bartlett, which will be a familiar name if you are a fan of The West Wing, because that is who the president in that show was named after. And he was also like a signer of the Declaration of Independence or something. Now, as I am sure you know, before it joined the United States, Texas used to be an independent country, and I'm sure you know this because Texas people cannot seem to go 5 minutes without bringing it up. Anyway, as a result, Texas had its own set of presidents from the time it separated from Mexico in 1836 to the time it became a state of the US in 1846. Now, I know the Texans like to think that their time as an independent republic was like this epic, grand, glorious thing, but in reality, independent Texas was this very poor, very weak, very obviously temporary country, which is why it only lasted 10 years. And during that 10 years, they also had a lot of internal political turmoil, which is how they managed to go through no fewer than 5 presidents. David Gouverneur Burnett, Sam Houston, Mirabeau Bonaparte Lamar, Sam Houston again, and Anson Jones. And pretty much all these guys did was try to figure out a way to get their country to join the US, which took a long time because the Texans really wanted to keep slavery, and a lot of Americans thought that the US really didn't need another giant slaveholding state. But by 1845, the Texans had won the argument and they joined the US, and as we all know, America never had a debate about slavery again. By the way, did you know that at one point, Texas President Sam Houston wanted to annex New Mexico, California, and the Oregon Territory? British Columbia, where I live, used to be part of the Oregon Territory, which means that in some alternative timeline, I could be a Texan right now. Speaking of California, California had a president of its own for less than a month, a guy called William B. Ide. So much like Texas, California was originally part of Mexico, but it was also full of a lot of American immigrants who didn't really like living in Mexico. So during the Mexican-American War of 1846-1848, a lot of the American settlers obviously sided with the US. During the war, William B. Ide was this sort of eccentric character who helped some American rebels capture the California town of Sonoma from the Mexicans. And because Ide sort of had delusions of grandeur, after capturing this one city, he proclaimed it an independent republic with himself as president. He called it the Bear Republic, and he even got one of his friends to make a flag. That lasted for about a month before the Bear Republic was just absorbed by the advancing US Army. In 1911, Ide's Bear Republic flag was made the official flag of the state of California, so now you know where that came from. And lastly, let us talk about the first and last president of Hawaii, Sanford Dole. Back in the late 19th century, Hawaii was an independent country, but it was also a country in a state of transition. There was a lot of pro-American sentiment in that country, in part because a lot of Americans had been moving there, just like in Texas and California. In 1893, Hawaii had a coup, and the Queen of Hawaii was overthrown by a bunch of American Hawaiian politicians. Their goal was to get Hawaii to join the United States. They had a lot of reasons for wanting to do this, but the one you always read about in the history books was that they were a bunch of rich guys and they wanted to restore free trade with the US, which was something the US had recently taken away. In any case, all of this went down at a time when the idea of the US absorbing new territories, particularly weird islands halfway around the world, was this big controversial idea in US politics. Republicans were for it, it, but Democrats were against it. And shortly after the coup happened, a Democrat, Grover Cleveland, was elected president of the United States, and he was like, shut up, Hawaii, we're not annexing you. So while the coup people sat around waiting for a Republican to get elected, they formed a new government, which they called the Republic of Hawaii. It lasted for about 6 years, and the only president was a guy called Sanford Dole, who was a prominent American Hawaiian politician. The Doles were a pretty powerful family in Hawaii, involved in everything from politics to religion to pineapples. The Republic of Hawaii was abolished in 1900 when the Republican William McKinley was elected president of the United States and agreed to annex Hawaii to the US. Now, there does exist a faction of native Hawaiians who are pretty sore about how all this happened. In 1993, the US Congress and President Clinton officially apologized for the American role in the 1893 coup. They referred to it as the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy and said that President Dole's government was formed without the consent of the native Hawaiian people. But all of that is way more than we can get into here. So what do you think of all of this history? Had you ever heard of any of these obscure state presidents before? Let me know in the comments, particularly if you know any other obscure American presidents I missed. And let me know as well if you have any other good ideas for future videos I could make about American history. Until then, see you next week.